So this is a continuation of problem 3-7 on page 142. Now we're ready to create our consolidated balance sheet. The first way we are going to do this is via the direct method. Before we can get too far though, we need to make a few changes to what I just copied down. One of the things we need to add is a few extra accounts. We have now our investment in Saks account and then also our goodwill. We also cannot use all of these accounts anymore as they are currently presented or were presented originally because of this transaction in here. We need to capture this information. So let's start with our current assets. We'll need to be, taking away $24,000 for the cash right in here. Then we have, let's fix that. PP&E is not going to be changing. Patents aren't going to be changing. We now have our $960,000 that will appear from our investment, and also our goodwill will eventually appear when we do our adjustments. Next, under our current liabilities, there's no change in long-term debt, but we will have a change in our common shares. Our common shares we want to be pulling from that initial entry way up here, and that is going to be an additional $954,000. Also, for our retained earnings, we can't just ignore it. So we now need to capture that $18,000 in expenses. So this will be a reduction in our retained earnings. So it will go from $120,000 to $102,000. Now, don't get too stressed yet because we are not balanced. We weren't because we didn't fix our formula from when it was originally presented up here. So let's just go and fix it. We just need to drag it down, and now we're capturing our $960,000. Let's move on to adding our adjustment column. So our adjustments, and then here will be where we present our consolidated balance sheet. Adjustments. Where do we get this information? Right above. So let's start us off. Current assets, $48,000. PP&E, $132,000. And patents will be our $72,000. And then down a little bit more, we have our goodwill. We don't want to forget about it. $84,000. Current assets, no change. And then down here, though, long-term debt does have a fair value increment attached to it. So we need to record that $24,000. Now, before we're ready to do our consolidated balance sheet, we need to delete some of the entries in here because they do not proceed onto the consolidated statements. In particular, our investment in Saks will be no longer, and our common shares and retained earnings in Saks won't be presented. That's no longer. So let's just delete these. You could also use a strike through option. I'm off a Mac here, so it's a lot more clicking, and I'll save you from that. Now you can see right now we're not balanced. Don't worry about that quite yet. Let's add up our figures and see how we do. There. And let's carry that down. Now, if all went well, we should have a balanced set of books. And we do. You can continue the formatting if you want. Oops. We'll just change that to be nice and consistent. $42.52. $42.52. So we have the direct method to a consolidated balance sheet. Now there is another approach that we can take. The other approach is called the worksheet approach in the books, and it really focuses on elimination entries. So in order to do that, let's copy this down one more time. I'm going to add a few columns, take away a bit of information, so just give me 1 second to play here. We want to re-add our investment account of 960. We also want to add back in the common shares that we had above. You can't forget about them, so let's just re-add them back in here. 168 and 480. There. So we're all back and new. Let's get rid of the adjustments because we are now actually booking entries rather than adjustments, and we'll need to have a few extra columns. So let's insert and shift everything over to the right. So we can do it one of two ways. You can have debits, credits, if that's your preference, by all means. Let's just do that. Debit and credits. Now what we need to do is we need to pull the information from up here where we did our initial calculations of our fair value increments and our goodwill. First things first, elimination entry number 1. Let's get rid of that 960. In either one, we still need to get rid of our 960. So in this case, as it is naturally a debit on the books, we need to have a credit. Bye-bye 960. One of the offsetting entries, or two of, are the 168 and that 480. And of course we have our acquisition differential of 312,000. Well, how do we get there? We get there by adding it into each of the different asset categories, similar to what we did for our initial adjustments. So let's start plumping them in. Our goodwill would be 84,000. Then our plant, once again, is going to be adjusted by 132. Our patents for 72,000. And our current assets for 48. Our long-term debt also still needs to be adjusted for 24,000, and that will be the offsetting 312,000 that we need. So now we just need to change the formula around, because before we were just adding. Now we can't just keep adding. So let's see how it currently looks. So we want to have that plus our debits. That's okay because this is an asset grouping, and less our credits. Let's drag that formula down. Oh, and this is a good sign because we're back up to our 4252 that we were up here. Now, a slightly different formula for the bottom group because we don't want to add debits, we actually want to deduct them, and we want to add a credit. So let's carry this down. And 4252. You can see the end result is the same regardless of which approach you take. And this one just has a few extra entries involved. But the big thing I want you to consider going forward, end result is the same. So now we have done all of our journal entries, we've done our consolidated balance sheet, and that is the end of this problem.